Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name's Nigel Edwards, Chief Client Officer, and I'll be leading on the first parts, but tag teaming with Phil for this really important session. I'm so pleased to see some very old friends here, old colleagues, advisors from the industry, great minds in here to have a future-looking discussion on the state of our industry. And throughout this session, we're going to share some of the materials that we shared up front in Phil's keynote, which is based on our Pulse survey that is just launching to press right now. And Pulse in itself is as a forward-looking view of the upcoming trends, right? So it's the data that comes from 800 G2000 C-level executives that we'll share during the course to stimulate the debate. So thank you, everybody. As we kick off, it would be helpful to do a quick name, rank, serial number, quick 20-second job just to introduce yourself. So I'm going to do it in the order in which I see folk on the screen here. And given this, and if I do miss anybody, my sincere apologies. It's not selective, but do shout out. All right, it's a big screen. So Rohit at Microsoft.
Yeah, hi. This is Rohit from Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft for about close to 15 years. I lead the procure to pay global function within Microsoft.
Procure to play.
Yeah.
Procure to play. Yeah, I like it.
Nice to lose it.
Yeah. Thanks, Rohit. Alan Holmes, JTI. We heard from JTI yesterday.
Hello there, everyone. Yes, Alan Holmes. I'm the technology lead managing the implementation of GBS from a technology perspective, and then the ongoing operations.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks very much for joining us. Linda Tuck Chapman. Right?
Well, I'm Linda Tuck Chapman. I'm CEO of Third Party Risk Institute, and I specialize in third-party risk management. I'm a former chief procurement officer, and I've had my business, for about 15 years. So it's a deep specialty for me, anyways.
Well, welcome. Thank you, Linda. And Mike Small, Sitel.
Hello, everyone. Mike Small, Chief Executive Officer for Sitel Americas. Been with the group for now 4 years and having just a blast. Great to have some time with all my colleagues today. Thanks.
Great to have you here, Mike. Thank you. And Candice. Hi, Candice.
Hi, everyone. Candice Teague. I lead the Global Business Services and Outsourcing Advisory practice for Deloitte in the UK on the consulting side. Good to be here. Thanks,
Candice. Lee? Yeah.
Hi there, Nigel. Hello, everyone. Yeah, Lee Beardmore, Chief Innovation Officer, Capgemini Business Services. Been with Capgemini for almost 19 years now, so a long time in post. And looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for the invite.
Good stuff. We've actually, I haven't deliberately done this. We've got a few GBS guys all at once here, and certainly enablement. Prashant to Hanover. Hi, Prashant.
Hello, everyone. My name is Prashant Thinge. I'm with the Hanover Insurance Group. I've been with them for last 18 plus months, and I lead the enterprise automation practice.
Thanks for joining us, Prashant. Thank you. Tom, IBM.
Yeah, hey everyone, Tom Ivory here, and glad to be here with the colleagues on the roundtable. I'm the global leader for IBM Automation and IBM Global Business Services, and I'm also an HFS alum, so it's good to be back here in the HFS family with all of you.
Friends and colleagues and industry peers. Jamie Solutions.
Hello, everybody. Really nice to meet you all. Good to see some of my bigger counterparts from the large system integrators, Capgemini and Deloitte. I run a company called Container Solutions. We specialize in distributed systems, cloud native, and we operate here in Europe. I'm in London today, but we also work along the East Coast from our office in Montreal. I'm really looking forward to this session.
Hi, Jamie. Sandy.
Someone muted me there. That must have been deliberate, Nigel, right? Because you know what happens when I talk far too much. I'm Sandy Kana. I'm an old hag. I've been in this industry forever. since the early 90s, and I'm currently at Anglo American PLC, where I'm tasked with reimagining what to do with shared services and GBS.
So good to see you again. And Liz Evans.
Hi, folks. Lovely to see you all. I'm a partner at KPMG, based actually in the US, so forgive the accent. I'm not bilingual yet, even though I've been here for 2 years. And I am charged with a similar task as Sandy. I have responsibility for our business services advisory here in the US, which incorporates all things related to GBS, and looking forward to the conversation about what the future holds for us all.
Good stuff. Thank you, Liz. And Nitin.
Good morning, guys. Nitin Rakesh. I'm the CEO at Emphasis, based in New York. Run the business from here. Most of you would know about us, but spun out of HP a few years ago, and I've been here since early 2017. And looking forward to sharing the screen with all you guys. Can't say the stage anymore until Phil brings us all back together, but look forward to the session.
Thank you, Nitin. We're trying to make this as easy to engage as we can, right? Ritesh Idnani.
Thanks, Nigel. Good morning, all of you. I'm based in New York at Tech Mahindra now for a little under 5 years. I drive our business process services, digital experience, and our products and platforms group globally. Glad to be out here with a lot of familiar faces.
Thank you, sir. Bob Cecil.
Yeah, hi, Bob Cecil. Good to see a lot of old faces on this call. I'm now a partner, founder of Timberstone Partners. We do experience-based advisory in the GBS shared services space, but historically, a lot of old colleagues from the KPMG days, before that, Equiterra days, Exalt days, Gun Partners, where we actually had the early definition of shared services all the way back. So Sandy, probably even, I think mine was 86. You said 90, so I may have you by about 4 years. So,
and you're better looking, Bob.
So okay, well, we're not going to get into that just yet. Anyway, maybe as we warm up for it. Anita, good to see you again.
Yes, thanks, Nigel. I'm very happy to be here with the group today. So thank you for having me. I'm at EXL, an analytics and operations management services business, which some of you know, many of you know. I've been here just about a year and have been in other analytics and software businesses prior, most recently IBM. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. Thanks for joining us. Michael Corcoran.
Hello, everyone. Michael Corcoran. I am the Chief Strategy Officer for DXC Technology. I'm new to the new DXC team. I've been there for 6 months, and I'm tasked with our strategy and specifically getting us back to growth.
Thanks for joining us, Michael. And last but most certainly not least, Sudhir. Good to hear you yesterday, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Nigel, and a very good morning, very good evening to everyone across the world, folks. I'm part of Coforge, and I've been with Coforge. I'm the chief exec at Coforge over the last 4 years. Very excited about the conversation. Looking forward to the conversation today as well.
Thank you very much. I'll give a quick intro myself. Nigel Edwards, Chief Client Officer at HFS. Been with HFS for 7 years, known Phil for since way back, I think from Everest days, right? And have spent 30 years on the service provider side of the desk with PwC, where Sandy and I worked together, with Accenture over 10 years after we sold the PwC outsourcing business to IBM, with Cognizant, and most recently with EXL. So always in deal-based and client-based roles, and took the view that it's kind of time to move to the adjacent side of the desk and watch what's going on in the industry and put some of that experience to good use. So listen, thank you for joining us all today. Looking forward to a good open discussion today. The first discussion point we have on the agenda, and Phil's going to share here. Actually, first, I know in my introduction today, I missed probably one of our favorite slides here. Favorite not because it's aggrandizing, but because it is a really, really important subject. So Phil, I know you want to say a couple of words on this.
I just wanted to thank absolutely everybody who's been involved in this summit for the last couple of days. We're now over 6 figures in donations directly and immediately to a number of COVID relief operations in India. We've helped kit out 100 beds in Tamil Nadu. And we've also just partnered with JP Morgan to complete a maternity clinic for mothers pre and postnatal with COVID as well. So we're hoping to send a load more funds over there at the end of this week. So just wanted everyone to know all the digital stress that's gone into organising this conference, and it's not easy organising these things in this format, has gone to really help an excellent cause. And India is the heartbeat of our industry, and it helps. It helps knowing that we're immediately getting oxygen and supplies, things, and bedding over to help certain folks. So just thank you everybody for that.
Thanks, Phil. And we've done our intros, and I think everyone knows Phil. So let's get into this then. We sent out an agenda and a bunch of questions on this for us to get going, and a lot of this, as I mentioned earlier, is driven by the Pulse data. So the first discussion item that we wanted to discuss was around GBS, right? And this sort of internal debate of GBS versus outsourcing, right? We have a lexicon that doesn't always help us, right? And sometimes it's taken to mean different things. But for the purpose of this, and to stimulate the debate anyway, we're thinking more GBS along internal global business services lines, distributed models, right? Versus what might be called typical outsourcing, BPO or ITO. Actually, if we turn to some of the data, and Phil flashed this up yesterday very quickly in his keynote, right? So this data, 800 global 2,000 executives, right? This is our Pulse study. And if you look at the black and the orange bars on here, where we are today, right, amongst our respondents, and we're expected to be in 2 years. There was some quite marked differences that stimulated the question for this particular discussion now, right? So we're seeing global GBS go from 40% to 25%, and we're seeing functional shared services move up, from 31 to 37%, centralized operations, moving up quite significantly, 50%, from 18 to 27%, and fairly flat in decentralized and don't knows. And I guess that was the catalyst for the discussion here today. As a backdrop to this, we're also seeing, and maybe Phil, if you could turn to the next slide, right? We're also seeing that in general, obviously differences in capabilities, right? Slight differences in capabilities, not massive market differences, right? But the IT business services are expected to grow at 6% in 2021. And then we've written, significantly, or we've written a lot anyway, around some of the mega deals that are around right now. Some of the big deals that have been happening globally, but also if you look at the competitor analysis, the market analysis that we do, Q3, Q4, Q1 have been showing record volumes of outsourcing transactions, particularly in the BPO arena. So that fits nicely with the GBS view of the world, and pretty much in all the major geographic regions that we're used to. So the question here, just back to the original question, is what's happening with GBS, right? So maybe here, as somebody who is self-confessed garrulous right up front, right? And who's sat on this, perhaps if I could turn to Sandy, right? Who's sat on this, both from a provider side as a consultant, and now I'm not sure it's gamekeeper term, poacher term, gatekeeper, but now running this in Anglo-American. It'd be great to get your perspective, Sandy, on how you're seeing GBS in the market? Is this a model that is dying? Is outsourcing back?
So you're going to get a slightly biased answer, Nigel, but you'd expect that, and perhaps hopefully based on fact and data and not just the emotions, which is my stock in trade, and I tend to pedal quite hard. So it's going to be a boring answer. I absolutely believe, and I'm seeing in the organizations. So I went client side. I thought I'd better actually try and do all the stuff that I've been espousing for 35 years, actually try and get my hands dirty and move into industry and actually practice what I've been preaching as an outsourcer. And that's where I grew up, as you know, Nigel, running outsourcing businesses for PW, PwC, and then IBM. But I firmly believe, and I'm going to give you a couple of proof points, hopefully that will be provocative, that the future operating model absolutely is a hybrid ecosystem construct. COVID-19, if it proved one thing, apart from how bloody awful the world is when it comes to politics, and how vaccine hesitancy still is pervasive, is that those who had a capability, centralized, shared, GBS, just survived better. And those who actually had an ecosystem network coped and thrived better still. Flip side, if you didn't, you did struggle for the initial period. And why is that? We know the reasons. Shared services, GBS, ecosystem partners, they're prepared, right? Contractually, DRBC type stuff's already in place. They're agile to changing demands of the enterprises. They're more maniacally controlled, says the auditor. We're better organized. We have a better view on the end-to-end value chain. I could go on. We're used to working collaboratively. We understand stakeholders. We're just more flexible. We're nicer people. We're better looking. Just keep going. But in reality, I think the future model, Nigel, is as follows. I think the core nucleus layer, which is really not about just transaction processing, but I kind of refer to it as the digitized monitoring of automated end-to-end journeys, the services bit. I absolutely believe that belongs with ecosystem partners, so BPO partners. The COE or the expertise layer, where the talent that historically used to sit in shared services and GBS, where the talent is upskilling to digital tech development, automation, COE, analytics and insights, FP&A, taxation, ESG, revenue assurance, just keeping up the value chain, marketing campaign management, product R&D development like Novartis do, those higher end functions, that's where I think the retained organization in shared services and GBS is going. We become the solvers of business problems.
Gotcha.
And I think there is a stepping stone beyond that, but I'm going to pause, let others chip in here. But I think it's a hybrid, and I think it needs to leverage that ecosystem. And I think it works well when we as leaders of services businesses recognize the difference and recognize that we need to absolutely become that command center, the performance monitoring organization across the enterprise, that digital, hate these words, digital transformation center, where all things people, process, and technology reside, to get into that COE layer.
Yeah, got you. Thanks. So it's interesting to come back to the hybrid, because I thought we might get that one pretty quickly, actually. But maybe as a self-confessed, technologist, right, Lee, right, and being on the provider side with something of Sandy's endorsement, what do you see as the future? Is it GBS outsource? Is it hybrid? And what's the technology's role to play in that? Provider. From a provider lens, right?
Well, I tend to think I tend towards that approach, and the reason I do that is because I think the digital environment that we're entering into, and the systems and capabilities we are providing, give the kind of flexibility and fluidity to allow organizations to buy into whichever kind of model they find the most appropriate. And I think having that sort of continuum and using the digital technology to allow us to have that flexibility, I think, is key. So it isn't an all or nothing. It isn't a one size fits all kind of model. And that sort of approach to flexibility, I think, allows organizations to choose what is right for them at their particular stage of evolution. So I concur with many things that Sandy was saying. Some of the more value-added functions are totally apt for staying inside the retained organization. However, there may be organizations that desire an additional level of capability that can be brought in from a provider who specializes in things like FP&A or ESG monitoring, that can add a value-added layer to those organizations that are perhaps lacking and lagging and haven't had the ability to catch up yet. So for my opinion, it is moving towards a hybrid model to allow us to have a continuum to provide more choice. And I think the technology and the digital aspect is going to allow us to drive more of those choices for organizations out there for them to consider.
Gotcha. No, thanks. So, again, really interesting. Some of the observations that we have is, there's the big four, right? And so maybe to come back to Candice here, right? That specialism services. So to Sandy's point around, retaining those, very, very business critical, judgmental elements, tax and audit and compliance at the highest level, right? But there's also there's also a strong role that the big four have played in that, right? And Candice, I know Deloitte have been launching for some time now the whole connected model. Be interested to get your thoughts on that, right? And how a big four player is adapting to that, and what you're seeing as trends.
Yeah, I totally agree with Sandy and Lee. That hybrid model definitely is the trend, but I think organizations are just a lot smarter with how they work with their outsource providers, how they rationalize the outsource providers, looking at them with what works from a true outsourcing of big processes and functions versus the niche outsourcing, the tax, for example. Why would you keep that when you can outsource it and get all the benefit from that, and therefore change your entire organizational model? And I still think there's that core, as Sandy was talking about, and then what sits around it. As Sandy says, some of the stuff you want to keep as a captive, those are for me the what I call GBS on demand or GBS Uber GBS. So these are services back to the business, your non-traditional services such as project management, transition management, change management, automation, and certainly a big one at the moment is data analytics, taking all the rich data that you have within your GBS functions and working with the business, to provide better insights. And then, of course, moving up the value chain. I think GBS leaders have come out as the unsung heroes of COVID. We kept the business going through finance performance, managing cash flows, working capital, HR looked after the people, IT built this entire virtual world, and now the business looking at us to do more. And so there's a lot about moving up the value chain and moving into new functions. And I think that sits right now still very much in the captive or in-house part of the GBS model. But at the core, a lot more going to the outsourced providers, but in a much more smarter fashion, and the relationships are quite different. Where Deloitte play, I think we're still very much in the advisory space on the outsourcing side. Certainly tax has been our bread and butter from an outsourced provider for many years and still will, along with the other big four. But still in the advisory stage, but we're definitely looking at providing some of those niche, more higher end, if you like, activities like the data and analytics, FP&A, etc.
Gotcha. Okay. So that brings us back. So in one sense, whilst we're seeing a polarization or these different moves in GBS versus, let's say outsource, perhaps one way of explaining that is that it is it's a shift in how the whole model is coming together, right? So whilst GBS folk might to come from the assumption that the structures are in place to do that, but now it's all about working with a partner network. Is that something that who might have turned to here? Bob, you've been in this for a long time, and I know you've got some strong views on here, right?
Yeah, I do have some strong views. So I'm actually going to go to your theme of one office. So think about what we're trying to accomplish. Two big themes there. One is interconnectivity, right? Connectiveness. People call it different things. The other one, Candice, you were making mention of it. It's a lot of these competencies about doing transformation and digital transformation in particular at scale. Those are things like, a lot of people call them COEs, things like experience management and process management and intelligent automation and data and analytics COEs, things like that. So if you look at what is happening in the marketplace from the buy side, is that companies are moving, particularly if they have a GBS model, more into that competency-based type of a model to be able to actually drive digital transformation at scale. And for the core services that Sandy made mention of, they're doing it more on an integrated end-to-end connected type of a basis. What it means for the service providers in relationship to the internal is that first, the interconnectedness one, doing end-to-end processes, front, middle, back office. A lot of the core services can be done by the service providers, but the glue is people like global process owners that have to stay within the organization. So that's your process management organization. When it talks about these competencies that drive digital transformation, those are ideal for a GBS organization. It could happen in other, by the way, it doesn't have to be in a GBS organization. It could happen in an IT functional organization. That's why I think some of your research that you were showing on those different models shows some of that, is that people are moving into those digital transformation competencies. And then the service providers, I think what's happening with them is you're getting this melding between what they were as traditional BPO or ITO providers to becoming more like consultants, because they're providing some of these digital transformation COE capabilities that augment the internal teams to be able to do it, because frankly, there's a lack of talent in the marketplace for those. And so people are gravitating towards the outsourced providers to be able to do that and not just be your traditional transaction processors.
Got you. Yeah. So, I mean, in short, Bob, I kind of summarize that. It's almost about there are different types of work, to high value, core, and the whole business of GSI and into integration. And often there, is it fair to say that they're almost what's driving a kind of sourcing decision then? Okay. And that therefore is leading to this hybrid and this much more comfort of working and collaborating together in a larger ecosystem.
Talent is driving the sourcing decision much more than just low cost transaction processing.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. Anyone have any? Let me ask you, anyone have any contrarian views? Right, this is a lot of convergence here, right? I think, and see. And by the way, Bob, particularly liked your view here. We see that same thing. We see, in one sense, we see Big Four moving in more into providing, say, managed services. We see process companies moving much more into digital, and EXL has done this. Anita. Jen backed. We see traditionally IT companies now merging into services. So it's so very much tending towards a middle. But does anyone have any sort of contrarian views on that, or anything they'd like to add? Let me just throw that open before perhaps we conclude this part. Right now, I can see Linda putting a hand up. I can almost see Michael leaning forward a little bit. I think if I'm reading the body language. Linda, please.
Well, having worked in the field of third-party risk management for a number of years, right? So I'm an advisor, an educator, et cetera. I really tend to look at the organization a little differently than I did as a chief procurement officer when I was trying to help the business execute business strategies and find the right structure of relationships. So now that I deal much more in creating a view of what I call the extended enterprise, right? So I really don't think any longer about, is it a hybrid model, is it GBS, et cetera. I really start to think about organizations as operating as extended enterprises. So the company itself is actually probably the smallest element in this, because the relationships that they have drive the business today, right? So it's really getting into the right relationships. So I actually think that there's, sort of more future looking. You've got the run the business piece, which will never change, right? You have to respond to today's requirements, take advantage of digitization, analytics, and other types of services that are available. But I think basically that companies should take a pause right now, and they should bring in companies that they're close to, that they know are very strategic, along with their leadership team, and really look at the shape of the organization in the future as operating as an extended enterprise, and what should the delivery model be? Because when I work with individual firms and I'll reach out to them, with a client or whatever and say, well, we're trying to solve this problem. What I'm seeing basically is they're trying to bring a solution to a problem they may not entirely understand, because that's a service they offer today. I think if we're going to stretch ourselves and produce a better tomorrow, what we learned during the pandemic is these big firms, basically, they performed, right? Your relationships performed. Where the problems existed, in fact, was some of the outsourcing, the fourth party, and the smaller firms. And that caused executives to take a pause and say, how are we delivering our services to our clients, and should we change? So I think that conversation is already happening in the C-suite. So how do we help push the thinking forward to say, let's run the business, let's make, sort of the best decisions for today, but let's look and see how we should run our extended enterprise 5 years from now. Because if we do that, we will probably think about our relationships with third parties differently, how we use technology, how we use talent that's out there, and how are we going to deal with the future opportunities and get ahead of the pack. Right. So it's a little bit different view of the world, because I'm not looking at individual deals. I'm really looking at the whole company. How does it operate? And what does the extended enterprise look like? Does that make sense to you?
It does to me. One clarification I had there was perhaps when you say extended enterprise, you're talking within the enterprise itself or within a larger ecosystem.
Yeah, well, I used to call it ecosystem too, and I really think about it now as sort of this operating model, which is an extended enterprise, right? So you've got what we call the retained organization. You have the third-party relationships. Sometimes they're outsourcing, and sometimes they're GBS, and sometimes they're a hybrid, et cetera. So I'm thinking basically it gets a little bit confusing actually if you're looking at corporate strategy. But what we do know, because we have so much more information about risk and performance and opportunities and value, is really to start to harvest that data, look at basically what we've done and what's been successful, what got us through the pandemic and what caused some pause, and really look at the future. So I'm thinking about taking the opportunities and marrying them up with the risk data and looking at your concentration risk, right? So where do you have a lot of services? Where do you have a lot of activities? Who are you doing business with? And deciding what shape of what should be the shape of the organization 5 to 10 years from now, right? So just pulling it up and looking a little bit more broadly, because I think you come up with different solutions. It's sort of like doing a blue ocean strategy for your company with a ton of data, and a lot of very, very good business partners that are part of your extended enterprise. So if you want to bring them closer to you and help your company be successful, rather than thinking about them as individual entities in an ecosystem, make them part of your extended enterprise and say, this is how we operate our company. We do this, and we've got these layers that spread out into the world around us. Because even if we're not doing business with a third party, they're doing business with someone, and that's part of our environment. Right, they're fourth parties and beyond. So
we're gonna go a little bit into other areas. Talking into around data and taking some of the more human angles that Phil's going. But perhaps a really good segue into that. I know certainly from personal experience, right, on the provider side, my challenge often was that we could take something over functionally, but the silos, the data, the culture of the organization I was working with, the way decisions are made, became some of the barriers to start to think more in an extended enterprise manner, or a one office manner, as we'd say. Phil, do you want to pick up from here? As I know this is a subject dear to your heart, and we'll endeavour to bring a few more folk in. It's a big panel, so I'm sure there are views on what we just discussed, but we'll bring you guys in as we go.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, I'd love to get some views here on is work at home a catalyst or an impediment for innovation? And data from the Pulse study, this is brand new data, shows that across the Global 2000, this is 800 of them, they're sending 60% of staff back to the office this year, 60%. We can even look at how that breaks down by industry, by region, for example, and by function. And it's interesting. These are the numbers of expectations to stay working at home. So the rest are going back to the office. And so it's interesting that I'd say some industries with maybe fairly legacy support operations like telecom and energy, they're actually moving back to the office slower than maybe certain industries like tech, obviously retail, where healthcare, where they need people, much more around the whiteboard or back in the manufacturing plants, for example. And then by region, we've got, UK and US are slightly more aligned to more home working than Asia Pac, rest of Europe. And so, we've had endless debates about how do you get stuff done in this environment. And is it really driving innovation, or is it just keeping the wheels on? So I'd love to get some thoughts on this. Maybe Ritesh, if you're available, you were like one of the, I think we did a blog on you. You were like the George Clooney of the industry, racked up more MLs than anybody else. And now you've been grounded for well over a year. What's your view on this? Is this an impediment or a catalyst to innovating?
Yeah, 15 months and counting. I haven't boarded an airplane. So I've left the George Clooney behind for a bit. But let's talk about the work from anywhere, right? As opposed to just the work from home itself. One of the things that I think it has done is it's fueled productivity as it pertains to individual transactions. So a lot more people are spending time in the business as opposed to on the business. And I think that's one fundamental difference that we end up seeing, right? So people have, are available pretty much 24/7. You're accessible, you can't escape. When you travel, you had some amount of downtime, if you will. And oftentimes that proved to be a catalyst for reflection, for people to take time on the business. And I think today what it's forced pretty much all C-suite execs is to carve out those white spaces a lot more to ensure that they're actually able to take time on the business rather than being burdened on routine transactions itself. So I think that's one key theme that I would see. The second theme that I think is related to this is when it comes down to tasks like you got to collaborate, you got to brainstorm. The physical environment is a lot more conducive. The water cooler conversations help to kind of move the wheels forward a lot quicker, as opposed to everything being scheduled as a Zoom call. And oftentimes, I think there's probably value in doing some transactions in the office in that mode. So collaboration and innovation related activities, I think certainly, probably take a step back, or you have to go through a few more iterations to get to the end outcome. Whereas that's something that you could achieve probably better in a physical environment as opposed to in a remote setting. And I think the third point that I would probably say is, I think this is also varied by regions. So if you take certain aspects, like certain parts of the world, like the eastern part of the world, take countries like India, Philippines, etc. There's often a lot of need for control and trust on what people are actually doing when they're working from anywhere as well. And that, I think, the pandemic in some senses forced people to take a hard reset on that in double quick time. So the good news is, I think people have now accepted that, hey, you can work, routine tasks can get done, productivity is probably going to be up. The downside of it is, has it actually lowered the trust barriers or improved the trust barriers itself over a period of time? That's something to watch for. The only comment that I would also just add in closing out there is, how sustainable is this on a continuous basis? The rules for what the future of work is going to look like are still going to evolve. A lot of associates in the workforce are dealing with mental health challenges and the fatigue that's come in by just being in this, always on environment, if you will. And how do you deal with that in that context is going to be important. People want to get back to work in that sense. So I think that's probably going to be one of the factors that's going to fuel it. And last but not least is the demographic. You take the Gen Z population itself and the younger workforce, they actually want to get back to work rather than actually being in a remote setting because of because of how they've they miss the social interaction. At the end of the day, we're all social animals. We crave for that interaction, which the remote setting does not fully offer. So I would say these are the 4 or 5 things, that variables that one needs to watch for as we start evolving what I think the future of work looks like, and the rules for those start emerging.
Yeah, I must apologize. The George Clooney reference was to the movie Up in the Air, where he used to fly around the world firing people. So properly.
Digital body language is a good is a good substitute.
Yeah, he could probably do his job far more efficiently on Zoom, couldn't he? Yeah. So Mike Small, you run a major global customer experience operation, and our analysts covering that space came back with some numbers. I think 70% of call centers are back to 70% capacity, and it's a growth market, and reps are in demand, and Gen Zs and millennials on the whole don't like working from home. So if you can't provide a fun office environment for them, they just go to the next company to work for. Is that something you're experiencing a bit? They want to be back in the office? So
we absolutely are, Phil. I can't agree more with my colleagues that the future of work from our standpoint is going to be a combination hybrid environment. Period. Full stop. 2025, I believe all of these industries that are stating that it's going to be 45, 50, 42%, I think it's going to change dramatically. And it's going to be about how we as leaders engage our workforce. Because first and foremost, and Ritesh just adequately, spoke to this, we have to meet our workforce, where they want to engage, where they want to work and collaborate. So one of the things that we've done as a group is all of our mega centers will be revisited. We have instituted, and we have popped up with COVID, 18 Sitel Max hubs, my associate experience hubs, where they're smaller, they're closer to where our associates live, but they're able to facilitate collaboration, where they can come in and deal with an IT issue, meet with their coach, meet with their manager, interact as a team. And it's rethinking how we look at workforce management, how we do planning, how we ensure that we have the ability to provide ultimate flexibility to the associate. And technology has enabled that tremendously. One of the things that we've done is revamped our entire design thinking methodology around collaboration with what we call the max engagement model, where we have to get the data silos integrated. We have to get our teams working globally. We have to ensure that we provide the platform that will allow that collaboration to happen, but also be able to be local, connected to communities, and that feeling of human connectivity. So it's a fine balancing act, but hybrid centers are here to stay. Our centers will be more professional service hubs. That's what we are going to be evolving to. The days of large global business shared services transaction centers, they're going to exist. There's always going to be a role for those. Or the days of large complex CX centers are going to exist. There's going to be a role for them. But I think fundamentally, in order to get the talent that we need, we're going to have to meet in the middle and ensure that we're providing that type of flexibility in terms of both in-center as well as the ability for them to work anywhere. And it's the anywhere piece for our business that's creating a lot of security, governance, risk, control challenges that absolutely need to be rethought through. And in order to do that, we're getting folks that have 25 years of security and IT experience talking to the Gen Z, the Gen Y, associate on what they need. And those conversations are just interesting. That's all I can say. So more fun ahead, but I think it's going to be absolutely very different by 2025. Some of these legacy industries that are kind of going back towards the traditional model, I don't think they're going to get the talent unless they have the ability to have a hybrid, flexible approach to attract, retain, and develop talent, both flexibility to work anywhere, but the ability to come in and actually develop them in terms of associates. So that's our take.
And the worry is that some folks, especially younger generation, they do the work they need to do. They're finished by lunchtime, and then they go walk the dog for the rest of the day or whatever they're doing, right? Whereas when you're in an office, you might, or they'll spread that work out for the day. When you're in an office, you might finish everything by lunchtime. You're in the office for the rest of the afternoon. So you go find things to do. You go talk to people. You go interact with folks. And that's something that is a big shift. I'm going to, Nitin Rakesh is there. Nitin, emphasis. You work in a deep tech world where you work with a lot of young talent and you work with a lot of complexity. How do you find trying to innovate with clients in a remote setting versus a physical setting? How's that experience been for you?
I think, Phil, I think a lot's been said about Ritesh and Mike, but I think for us, from an innovation standpoint, I don't think the current hybrid stroke remote environment, it's not been an impediment. If anything, I think it's fueled people's imaginations, and we've actually done a lot more work in the last 12 months than we probably did in the previous 24, 36 months. Purely, whether it's throughput, whether it's the pace of change, the excitement around, new tech. I mean, our whole quantum lab's been set up remotely. We've actually got, the first set of, client use cases being done remotely, and we just announced a partnership with the University of Calgary, all remote, right? So it's not an impediment, so to speak, from a the ability to innovate perspective. But I think the two things that we have to keep in mind as we think about the longer term model, whether it's around innovation or service delivery, as Mike was talking about, I think there are certain regulated industries which will almost always have issues with 100% acceptability of remote. Banking happens to be one of them. But I think the bigger issue really is collaboration outside of just the technical aspects of innovation, or it's not about working on the cool tech or the IP asset. It's about the culture that you want to drive, the ability to actually bring people together from a team building perspective. So I think the moniker we're using is you can work from home as much as you want, but you probably have to be in an office setting for collaboration stroke team building, right? So I think that's what we are reconfiguring a lot of our corporate workspaces to actually turn them into design thinking, stroke collaboration workspaces, less working desks. So we're going to rip off the desks and just turn them into really team collaboration workspaces. I think it's still in a way early days. I know we've debated this for the last 15 months already, but we don't know what we don't know yet. And I think this will evolve. This is a space that will very, very quickly bring in new innovation in itself as to how do you, I mean, we heard this whole concept about design thinking remotely. That wasn't a concept 18 months ago. It was harder to get clients to to convince them to do a remote design session. Now I think it's become common practice, but I think similar constructs will evolve. We are seeing massive innovation going through this future of work, coming out of all the software providers as well as hyperscalers. So I think it's a fascinating space to watch. But one thing is clear, that if you have to attract the talent, if you have to give them the flexible productivity stroke, balance of life, we have to find a way to create this remote stroke hybrid workspace.
Yeah. Alan Holmes at JTI, I think I'd love to get your view. You work in the GBS space, right? And how have you felt the conditions for innovation versus just keeping the wheels on?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting time for us in terms of setting up our global business services, which has all been done, as Jay said yesterday, all been done remotely. So in terms of the setting up and putting in place the technology infrastructure and the basics required to run a GBS, there's been no hindrance at all. I think what's quite interesting in some of the previous comments is what is highlighted to us in this environment that we're in at the moment is flexibility. And when it comes to attracting talent and using it as a leverage to bring and retain the best people, I think that hybrid model is definitely here for us to stay. The exact direction we're taking, it's obviously too early to tell, but from an innovation perspective and an organization, we are used to running projects remotely. So even before GBS, we would always run our global programs remotely and only get resources together at key moments within a project lifecycle. So it's the way we've always worked. So from that perspective, I think it's certainly not a hindrance. I think if anything, it gives us an opportunity to give better conditions and better opportunities for our workforce.
Interesting, thanks. And so Prashant Hinge over at Hanover Insurance. I've been to your offices in Worcester, right? Worcester, Massachusetts, right? And I've been to a lot of insurance companies, and they are very in-office heritage businesses, right? So how is the structure now? You're trying to innovate in a remote fashion. Are people just desperate to get back in and get back to what it was like, or is there an acceptance that the world's changed and things are being done differently?
That's a great question, Phil, and I wish I could give you a straight answer, but there isn't. I do see that our emerging tech work that happened over the last 12 to 18 months has gained tremendous traction even during COVID. But if you step back and look at it from a structure standpoint, it does require to be much more tuned with the strategy from if you were to take it into the long term. Now, having said that, there are a couple of things as I'm hearing this conversation and from my own personal experience, I think we've got to be mindful about, be it a service provider or a carrier or any company for that matter, is first, the biggest do not do is stigmatize remote working, right? I think that's a very important aspect as we design new policies and strategies, and really think about evolution from the workplace to the work platform, kind of an environment where it's a combination of hybrid work, it's a combination of different demographics, it's also taking into factor all the challenges of remote working and in-person working, and also thinking about how we are structuring that work platform for running, optimizing, and transforming the business and stitching our policies around it. So it needs a lot more work, a more thoughtful approach on how we answer this question. And I think these models are going to evolve and be much more sophisticated over time. So there is no short answer.
Okay, you've succincted it pretty good. I like that. So this takes us on to I think locations. I'll just bring up this again here. And maybe Sudhir Singh. I was very impressed with some of the innovations you had to do, particularly with a third of your business tied to travel over the last year. But what is the optimum location strategy? So this is the data from the Pulse. This is what extent will you change your delivery model for shared services and outsourcing over the next 18 months. And you can see here, offshore resources, they're going to be an increase from over half, nearshore slightly more going onshore, and then even slightly more are going what we call location agnostic, which would include work from home. And you can see here the percentage of decrease. So, they're all increasing, but there's definitely an increased focus on more nearshore, onshore, whatever shore focus here. So maybe, Sudhir, if you could kick this off with some of your thoughts around the global delivery model.
Sure. So just segueing back to the last question, right? The global delivery model, in some ways, at least in my experience, has got influenced a bit by this whole work from anywhere concept, the talent catchment that we can approach globally. And when I look at offshore and on-site locations, has clearly gone up. Most firms, GBS, outsourcing providers like us, all of us, I suspect, are going to be on a very interesting and a very aggressive localization strategy. You hear about this, we read about this on an ongoing basis. Our experience has been, given the fact that work from anywhere quite clearly is a trend that is here to stay, the talent catchment that we're going after across the world, across countries, across tier locations within countries has gone up materially. If I look at just the global delivery centers, the traditional cities that one ended up creating centers and hubs around, that is likely to get fractured because one will increasingly start getting into tier 3, tier 4 cities, getting talent from there and putting in place hybrid structures. The other piece that's very interesting, and this is something that we've been looking at, is figuring out ways of setting up nearshore operation centers. Now, the GBS organizations always had those. Outsourcing firms used to hit a certain scale before they thought about doing it. You increasingly find firms like Coforge, and we would like to hit the $1 billion mark soon, setting up onshore operating centers, different parts of the world focused on spaces that can drive innovation. If I go back to the first question that we were talking about, right? The first question around GBS versus outsourcing. The broad spectrum trend is GBS organizations, outsourcing organizations, whatever it is. We're all trying to establish a path from effectively being cost-focused to innovation-focused. Innovation is A, going to get driven by a broader talent catchment approach. B, of course, from an on-site, onshore, nearshore perspective, setting up a larger number of operating centers. In our case, and I think we spoke about this yesterday, we found exceptional, interestingly, gaming talent, gaming technology talent around Las Vegas, Nevada, and that's where we set up a center. We found outstanding data talent around Augusta, Georgia. That's where we set up a center. So I suspect that's how I see this evolving. That's the experience that we've had as well, Phil.
Thank you, Sudhir. Maybe Michael Corcoran at DXC. How are you tackling this in terms of you're trying to redefine the strategy of the business and looking at a number of merged entities over the last few years? How are you viewing the whole location agnostic offshore strategies you shift forward?
So I think there's two questions or two answers I'd give you, one for DXC and one for our clients, because modern workplace is a really important and big business for us. We looked pre-COVID to sell it. We got lucky with the COVID happening at the right time that we pulled it back because COVID has changed everything, and we think it's going to change. Clients are asking for a lot of help. So let me start with us first. Is we are a believer that for DXC specifically, and the new DXC that we're driving, is distributed workforce meaningfully virtual unless you're at a client is going to be the model going forward for the new DXC. And what we've been doing is a big focus on a culture, the mindset and practices around how we deliver, how we innovate, et cetera. And then most importantly, change management to make it happen. So most of the leadership team is ex-consultants, who have run technology and business process operations businesses at massive scale. And so we're driving that pretty hard. Now, when we do have centers, we will have centers that I call center of excellence. Just given the legacy of DXC, there is a big opportunity for us to move centers to where the best location is for different things. We all know there's different locations. It just doesn't have to be onshore. For the best data scientists, we are engineers of engineers and mission critical technologists. There are locations in the world, that aren't onshore that have better talent than the US or the UK, et cetera, for that. And so for our centers of excellence, you will see us pivot more to those over time. So that's us. If you step back to our clients, they're all over the place depending upon what they want. They all recognize as part of our business that they need to think through this. And so most of them are thinking through this. Some are anxious to get people back into the office and don't think they need to change a ton. And what we're seeing is, as many have mentioned here, like their employees aren't naturally grasping that. Like they're raising the question to this new generation of why do we need to do that? Some clients are at the other end of the spectrum. And so I think we're going to see lots of, like we saw Jamie Dimon come out and say, I don't want to talk about distributed workforce. I want my people back in the office tomorrow. I think we'll see, we have some clients telling us that. We'll see that that's probably not the right fit for them. On that other end, some clients look like us saying you can be completely virtual. But I can tell you, Phil and everyone, that there's a lot of thought process going through this. And, in some of your previous roundtables, we've talked about this, which is actually technology exists to do all the things we're talking about. It's more about the people, the mindset, the culture, and the change management. And so I think this is going to be a really interesting next 24 months as we start to open up to say, what is the culture, the mindset of all of us, and the change management to make it happen? Because we do know personally, based on the technology and the processes we built with Microsoft around this, that it's possible. It's possible to innovate. It's possible to run remote unless the client wants you at their location. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see that the gates are open. Like, what can this industry go do?
Yeah, and it also creates HR issues around. It's statistically proven that staff in office get promoted faster than those working remotely, and things like that as well. And this is going to exacerbate that quite heavily. And Liz Evans at KPMG, you've worked for most of your career managing relationships, and it must involve an awful lot around global locations and how these are run. What's your take on the shift around globally distributed work as we stumble back to a hybrid work environment?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I completely concur with Michael. There is a significant amount of mental energy being put into this in terms of looking at, now that the GBS centers or the capability centers have demonstrated to their respective organizations that they can do more. They've survived COVID, they've been the hub of activity. And so there are a lot of questions about, should we bring things back in-house? I also think one of the keys to success, Michael mentioned it in terms of change management, and Mike mentioned it earlier with design thinking from an innovation perspective, is we have to think about the experience that we're offering in this extended enterprise and this ecosystem. And so both for our employee base, not just from an HR perspective, getting the work done, but from a GBS services perspective, how are a remote workforce and a workforce that's in the office going to interact with the GBS environment? And similarly to the conversation that we've had all morning, I think that the GBS leadership in the industry is in an ideal position to set the bar on what service experience should be and make sure that that is consistent across the ecosystem, which requires us to integrate the contracts that we have and make sure that we can manage that in really in a holistic way. Very, very different from managing the outsourcing relationships previously. But I definitely see that experience and the experience we're offering our workforce internally and our extended workforce is absolutely critical to our success of being in a mixed location environment.
Thanks, Liz. Let's shift gears then to our next section on, because I think it's very related in terms of there we go, looking at how we distribute operations, and it's how do we assess the future of data, processes and automation. So what are the barriers to implementing a consistent global data strategy? And how do you cultivate trust in data to accelerate what we love to call digital transformation and empower your people? Maybe Tom Ivory over at IBM, would you like to talk a little bit to what's changing in terms of consistency of data? What's really important here? You know, we presented yesterday around the fact that it's all about data. Data is your strategy. Rethinking processes to get the data you want, understanding how to move work into the cloud where you automate the data, and then eventually refine that data with AI once it's in the cloud. So how are you viewing the current work model and how this is going to evolve?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Good question. I think COVID-19 sparked a workflow revolution that's underway right now. And in listening to some of the sessions yesterday, I heard a few times that automation is not your strategy, and you have to have a data strategy. I would, even challenge that thought and go above and beyond and say that you have to have a workflow strategy underway across the enterprise. And what I'm seeing from customers is that they finally have the determination, the support from top level leadership, the courage to tackle the re-engineering of their workflows. And there's a perfect storm, occurring where we've seen automation work. We've seen that process automation together with OCR and natural language processing and a lot of the other emerging technologies are able to, accomplish what we've set out to do. And that's given people confidence in order to, take that into their workflow re-engineering. But the data, is an essential component. And what I also see is the fear of trying to execute on that workflow transformation, and their people, looking at the data in their head and that tacit knowledge being a part of their empowerment in their roles. And so in order to remove the barriers, there needs to be a leadership change in culture and helping their people say, look, even if this data, that you've been using for your job, that you're familiar with, and how the process works, how the workflow works, we're going to help you, and we're going to instill this confidence in the people, in order for them to evolve their roles in the company. And I'm starting to see that quite a bit right now. There's this, I was in a discussion with a CIO at a bank yesterday, and he said, look, I don't have an automation problem. I don't have a data problem right now. What I have is a cultural problem in order for me to start crystallizing and documenting all of my processes and operations across fraud, across the credit card department, across retail and commercial. And I need to get my people to buy in that we need to do this. And it shouldn't be out of fear for you to do it. It's let's grow, all of our services that we provide to our clients together and do more with what we have. And so I think, the data, is an essential component of all of this. But again, the workflow transformation is what I'm seeing as the higher level, type of blueprint that they want to execute on.
Thanks, Tom. Well, I think Jamie Dobson, Container Solutions, you talk a lot about native cloud and moving data into the cloud. But how do you really cultivate trust in the data with clients? I mean, as we're saying, if your data's crap, it's not going to be any less crap because you've got it in the cloud, right? So how do you cultivate the trust in the data to really create that cloud-driven environment?
You certainly can't trust data no matter where it comes from if it's rubbish. I think it's a good question, Phil. I actually don't have the answer. So earlier on in the discussion, when we were talking about remote work and all remote strategies, there are some emerging practices that are clearly becoming best practices, with Mike mentioning the need for hybrid. I'm not sure. I think the old-fashioned idea when I was a student, garbage in, garbage out, right? So it's how do we what are the processes by which we move data to the cloud? What are the processes by which we consume it, et cetera, on the one hand. But on the other hand, just because the data is somewhere else, does that fundamentally change how we think about it or how we process it? So I start to think it's more of a psychological issue. And I must say that in the last few years, every year, that gets easier. People get more and more over their fears of the data not being localized or not being immediately accessible. And I think people are getting used to this now.
Right. And Anita Mann over at EXL, you guys have, you're putting your whole strategy around being a data company now, and with a very strong business services alignment. How are you viewing the ability to get close to your clients and your clients' data? How's that working for you guys?
So really, it's the center of all that we are doing. We think that to really improve these end-to-end processes, you have to start with the data, and you have to be able to kind of break down the silos between processes that are keeping data kind of locked up, so that whoever is interacting with a customer, be that through a digital means or through a human, that they have the best insight to be able to support that customer at that point in time. And I think we've talked a lot about how the pandemic has accelerated changes, has changed customers' expectation for service and convenience, and it's built confidence in our teams in their ability to make changes and get things done faster and different than they expected. And what we see with clients is, that they're looking for more flexibility, and they're more willing to make bold moves. And if you go all the way back to the start of this conversation around the role of GBS and the COEs we were talking about, I think one of those roles is to be able to, look at the support that the business needs from the perspective of the customer journey, and how you can make data available across what used to be siloed processes, so that at each touch point you have the most insight to be able to support that customer the best that you can.
Thank you. Do you need to? So let's maybe, Nigel. So let's take the conversation on to change management. And I think it's really important. And Nigel, did you wanted to share some views on this one, right? So.
Sorry, just unmuting myself here. Yeah, so I think we sort of touched on it as we've been talking today, right? And you know, I guess my personal experience from sitting on the provider side of the desk is, you know, often that was the line item that got scratched, right? To make, you know, often make the business case work, right? When in actual fact, it was perhaps the most critical element of making a program work, right? So and we've touched on it. I think Mike's touched on it. In fact, many folk have touched on the change management aspects of it, right? But you know, it would be helpful to really have a conversation on this, on, you know, what's working and what's not. So, we have some quotes from this session yesterday. Maybe Phil, if you just go to the next slide. We had some so just from the panel, the C-suite panel that Phil shared, some of the follow-ups panels. It seems from this, you know, just from this feedback that, you know, certainly, you know, the pandemic has been a catalyst, and it's on everyone's agenda, right? Because it's now necessary. You know, and Thierry was saying, you know, it's much more than change management, about culture, about promoting change, embracing change, creating trust and comfort, you know, for our people to, you know, to make that leap of faith. It probably, you know, challenges perhaps some existing leadership styles where you've got to encourage a lot more, you know, empathy and openness. Kaushal Modi and Manish Sharma at Accenture talks about reward, rescale, redeploy. You know, almost rewarding folk for making themselves, making their job, eliminating their jobs through technology, right? And then a great quote, I think, you know, from Jay Desai at JTI, a ruthless adaptation, right? So this is, it's kind of existential or Darwinist, right, in feeling, but and it's come to the fore. I guess the question is, you know, what's going to, you know, what remain the challenges, and, you know, and what we're going to do about it to make it much more sustainable and embedded within our organizations. So I don't know who wants to take that. Maybe one of the GBS folk at the middle, maybe Candice, who's been working with this for a long time, if you want to respond to that. And if anyone wants to put their hand up and has a strong point of view, you know, happy to pass the mic around, so to speak.
Thanks, Nigel. I think when we spoke yesterday, you know, it's still the same thing that's been plaguing change management for years. So whilst, you know, we say the catalyst for change, the virus has been a catalyst for change, but when we talk about change management within GBS, transformation, you know, any sort of activity, it still is the first thing to get cut when the budget gets tight, right? And then often the pain comes later, and you end up forking out a lot more. You know, there are some just really simple things that I've seen being really effective. Is just having a different way of explaining what it is, changing the name, business readiness, etc. Because it has just got a bit of a bad rep over time, and it's seen as a sort of fluffy stuff, but actually so relevant and so important to get the transformation journey right and to get people on board with the change. But yeah, it's still a problem. You know, I think, as I said, some simple things around just renaming it, and also demonstrating why it's so important, later down the fact early on to your stakeholders, is certainly some things I've seen sort of help, you know, give it a better reputation, if you like.
Yeah, so it's really, you said, Rena, it's really about personalization of it, right? What it means for those impacted, and Yeah. But I guess that does have a lot of implication for how, you know, we recognize and reward people, right? And the behaviors, right? I see Mike nodding here. There's a lot of folk, and you touched on this earlier, you know, about people, culture, mindset. I think that was, you know, it's all about technology, people, culture, mindset. I noted down here, Mike, right? But maybe you want to expand on your experience.
Yeah, you know, Nigel, I absolutely have a strong point of view on this. I think, you know, let me just say what I don't think is working right now. What I don't think is working on transformational change is alignment with our customers. I don't think we have the trust sometimes of the customer and our teams that have actually aligned both information systems and, most importantly, data, because that's holding us back. I think that's one, you know, element that as a GBS organization or a, you know, BPO provider, we have to tackle together, is our two teams that are both tasked with transformational change need to be able to be on the same page with trust, with data, operating on the same principles and playbook. The second element you spoke about is culture, right? We spend a tremendous amount of time on culture. Our values, reinforcing the values, the culture of, you know, learn, lead, grow, develop, and promote. And I love, you know, some of the C-level suites, Terry and others yesterday. You know, culture is a big piece of, if we're going to build the trust of our associates, we've got to ensure that the platform of culture in the organization is able to support what we're trying to change, support what we're trying to transform, recognize, reward, promote, and have the freedom to fail during that process, right? If your culture, you know, embraces challenge, embraces opportunities to stretch, and all of a sudden when you fall, you know, your culture is punitive, well, that's not going to incent too much associates raising their hand to say, I want more. And then I think the final thing that's not working, we've taken some action over the last 90 days on this as we're looking at our strategy into 22, 23. We're going to put a dedicated communications leader in place to just focus on transformational change. You know, we're going through a global transformation. How do we communicate to our associates, to our customers, to our stakeholders, one consistent message around the need to transform our business, whether it's digitally, whether it's from a talent acquisition, workforce planning, Max Hub initiative for hybrid workforce. All of these various transformational goals need an aligned communication strategy. And I couldn't agree with our last colleague more. That's what we're not investing enough of. We've got great ideas. We all move very fast. We execute, we implement, but our people are confused. So how do we take a step back and ensure that we've got a consistent communication strategy around our transformational offices, our transformational goals, and ensure that people are with us in that journey as opposed to scratching their heads?
Thanks, Mike. This is one thing I was wondering about when we came into this conversation. Is there, and Linda, you were about to talk about this, I think, earlier, right? Is there a role for a chief change officer, a chief communications officer, right? Is there a board level role for that, right? As you go on this this enterprise, you know, extended enterprise journey, right?
I really do believe that there is a role out there, or there should be. And it would be a fascinating role. Think of what you can bring to the table around data strategies and change management and organizing your extended enterprise to drive value and innovation, et cetera. So I think that that's really a great idea. I do want to touch on the change management. So I wrote a book, Third-Party Risk Management, Driving Enterprise Value. And I wrote a chapter on relationship management in the age of millennials. Because one of the things that we know is happening today at a greater pace, even than it was when I wrote the book, is employee turnover. So that's in your own companies, and it's also within the third parties. So considering we're in a knowledge economy, we're not particularly good at passing along knowledge. We can't write policies and expect people to read them. We can't write procedures and expect people to read them. So how are we passing knowledge to our people? Because we can transform the business, but our business is changing every day anyways. So how do we deal with the day-to-day change management? And anyhow, so I wrote a whole chapter on it, and I wrote it with some other executives and a university professor, because I think it's worth studying. It's worth studying basically because that's how we make our businesses successful during major change and also during the change that we're experiencing every day.
Gotcha, thank you. Rohit, you've implemented blockchain, I understand. Certainly Saurabh Gupta tells you you put in blockchain, right, for your payments process, right? That must have been some change, right? Given, with an organization that finance that I think self-confessedly says, we're kind of used to working in our own, our own silos, right? A, how hard was that? B, well, congratulations on doing it, but it'd be great if you could share, how you made that kind of enterprise change happen.
Look, I mean, it's a great question, primarily because one thing that we have learned, kind of a black and white scenario, is technology generally works. It's a binary scenario, either it works or it doesn't work in the context of blockchain or crypto. In terms of the pure, the value proposition of the technology is always there. Where we always run into problem is, I call it human insecurity of change, right? Because again, any radical change, if you look again 500 years of your history, right, the radical change rarely takes immediate hold. It's always this very small incremental change, one small step at a time or one step of time. You definitely see a radical change happen. Blockchain kind of is going towards a radical problem where you're trying to change the whole paradigm of what we knew, took for granted, needing these intermediaries, our context of centralization versus this kind of changes everything to decentralization, right? Everything that you took for granted in the context of your belief system, people have to change. So it's a very, very, very hard problem. And in some ways, you have to make time your friend. And only with time, you will see change happen, but the change is happening as we speak, right? So few tips I would say from a change management perspective is don't go for a radical change. Obviously, most likely it will not work. Start with incremental change, small with one small thing at a time, and make the change as a need-based change. Because as human, there was a very interesting quote about this Darwin need, right? We are good at adaptation. If change is an option, people will not change. If change is driven by need, people will change. It's that willingness. As leaders, do we make it a need-driven change, or is it an option-driven change, right? So that's something to think about. And the way we are positioning it is we are saying, okay, how can we position our solution as a need-based? You do nothing, then it'll be left behind. This is where the industry is going, right? So a lot of challenges. I don't need to have figured it all out, but the learnings are that, the more we make it need-based, the more we make it incremental, small, one step at a time, change will take hold.
Gotcha, thank you. I'm conscious we are 5 minutes up to time, and I'm conscious that we need to get all folk engaged in this. I'm looking at some of the questions from the audience here now, and so you forgive me for two seconds while I just try and assimilate this in real time. I think the question sets that really come out here, the one that I think I like here is, and I'm paraphrasing whoever asked this, is what gives you as leaders hope that we will achieve digital transformation? That's a big one. Maybe for Sudhir here, right? Because someone once said to me in my early Accenture days, leaders are dealers in hope, right? So maybe what gives you hope, Sudhir, that this transformation will be delivered, right?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Nigel. That's a big, broad question that needs a lot of deliberation. But what gives me great confidence is the fact that if I just step back 10 years or even 20 years, every time as a provider, we had conversations with client organizations around enterprise IT, technology spend, transformation, the timing of that transformation was always bracketed under this quote unquote discretionary cost bucket. Today, there is absolutely no conversation. Could be a GBS provider, could be a tech provider, where technology or the spend associated, the commitment needed, to the point that Rohit made, the change management that needs to be orchestrated around digital transformation is seen as discretionary or optional. We are at a stage where, and we've been at that stage for a while, as the person who put the question talked about, where digital transformation is seen as an imperative. We are obviously going to struggle with it. We have struggled with it as an industry, as a broader ecosystem over the years. But the fact that it is now seen as an imperative that is non-negotiable, the fact that all resources are being directed to it, gives me hope that, as with just about any other big problem that all of us have collectively looked at as a goal, this will get solved over time. So at a very high level, that's how I would characterize the confidence in where it stems from. And I'll pause right there while I think a little bit more and get my thoughts in order there.
Possibly an unfair question, but maybe Ritesh as well. Yeah, the guy who goes first is perhaps disadvantaged, I understand, but maybe Ritesh, we could hear from you on that too.
So Nigel, I would view this in three lenses, right? And I think Sudhir kind of alluded to one of them. Take the past 5 years, take the present, and let's look at the future. I'm a glass half full guy, so an eternal optimist in some sense. But if you look at the nature of the discourse that we're having today versus what we had 5 years ago, you can already see the change that's emerged, and the kind of operating models, the proliferation of technologies, the choice of locations. I mean, you look at every aspect of our business, it's undergone a significant amount of change over the last 5 years. And I think that cycle has repeated itself pretty much consistently over a period in time. So that's the history part of it. Cut to today. And if you look at the pandemic in some sense, there's a reason why 2020, no pun intended, is looking at everything from a hindsight standpoint, right? And when you look at 2020, the pandemic in some sense has proven to be the great reset for all of us as well. The pace and the alacrity with which we've all adapted our business. In some sense, we were forced to, right? We didn't have a choice. We had a limited time window to reset our entire business and make it relevant for our clients. And I think that's shown again the pace at which we can adapt. What we also saw during the pandemic in some sense was the fact that businesses which had a high order of data maturity were much more resilient in adapting and being competitive as well, right? And we talked a little bit about the data side in a previous question that was posed. But when we look back to the future, look forward to the future, this gives me hope. On one hand, the pace of change continues to be enormous. The element of we don't know what we don't know is very high. The proliferation of technologies and how they will reset and reshape the operating models is going to continue to evolve. In fact, if anything else, this industrial revolution is probably going to challenge all of us in terms of the ability of the human mind to keep pace. And I think that means that we don't have a choice, but businesses will have to adapt to continue to remain relevant. And therefore, I feel digital transformation, if anything else, is going to get more and more accelerated going forward as well.
Thank you, Ritesh. I see we're at pretty much at time for this now. And I know we are going into a DigiCide chat coming up now. Phil, unless there's anything you want to add, I'm happy to summarize, or if you want to summarize, Phil.
Hey, I just got a lot of rich feedback from all of you folks, and I think people have found innovation in the remote work environment, but I think we're all embracing the ability to dovetail that with much more physical in-office interactions. But figuring out getting back there, I think, is a challenge as well. It's still fairly sporadic, and I think it's going to take some time. That really stood out for me. The changing face of GBS is fascinating in this environment as well, because where do you house centralized leadership? How does that evolve, particularly when we have a greater push away from the traditional location models, right? So, this has given me me personally, a lot of food for thought on how we get there. And then the big issue is change. How do we truly change in this environment and drive change and inspire change? Because motivation isn't something that we can give people. They have to motivate themselves. We can just, as leaders, provide direction, inspiration, tools, resources, content, but we can't provide motivation. We lead the horse to water. They got to ultimately drink. So this has been really good. Anything from you, Nigel?
No, I think, throughout yesterday and today, the whole the human aspect of this is coming through, writ large, and, change as a mindset, change as a constant, all of these, elements are coming into play now, coming back to people. Bob, talent drives sourcing, right? Talent drives location strategies. So the human aspect, I think, of technology is really what's coming to the fore. So, with that, thank you all for joining us today. A lot of folk on here. Because you all accepted, right? But thank you very much for joining us today, and please stay connected with us. Really, really enjoy this great debate. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Here we go. So welcome back to the sessions, everybody. It's been a fantastic day and a bit so far, and I really appreciate everybody pulling together and having such a great industry narrative. But joining me today is somebody I've known for several years now, and he's well known to many folks I know as well in the industry, and his recent elevation to Group Chief Executive of Operations for Accenture during a pandemic is something well worth listening to. So maybe Manish, you could start by just talking a bit more about yourself and your background and how you got to be where you are today. Is this something that you always expected to do or wanted to do, or you just fell into it?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, Phil, thanks for having me here. Right? I think great to have a chat with you and discuss with fellow leaders. I think I've been with Accenture for about, now this is my 27th year. So been a long time, in Accenture. I joined our consulting practice in 1995 in Mumbai. To be honest, when I did my engineering, I wanted to be a machine tool designer. There was never a single thought about outsourcing and PPO and operations. I don't think so that I even knew the names, when I did my lifetime. The vision was to be the best machine tool designer. I did work in a couple of Indian companies, engineering companies. When I came into Accenture, that time Arthur Andersen, it was more for the manufacturing practice of Arthur Andersen at that time. So I joined Accenture when it was, the outsourcing was not even there. Small consulting company in India doing premium work, with the Indian nationals, multinationals, right? I spent most of my career working out of India and building, I would say, Accenture's delivery footprint into what it is today. And now when I look at 2 decades later, it is, I would say, really exciting to lead the largest operations business on the planet. So very proud, very privileged about what I've seen. Talk about major influencers, right? And I will say, for me, the major influencers in my career have been our people. So it is not, I'm always driven by the people who are there on the ground. And I learned more from my folks on the ground than anybody else. So, people talk about some leader, some peer or something like that. For me, it has been the folks on the ground who have really inspired me. Whether it is changing our story, changing our strategy, it has always come not from some big events or leaders, from our people on the ground. In fact, I think some of the most compelling, innovating, and productive ideas that I have at least received, and what we are seeing in the play in our strategy, have come from our brilliance of our people. So largest influencers, our people on the ground, our people who do the work, our people who are able to think and trying to do things differently. And I'll give you one example, right? Right now, look at our automation journey. Largest robotic workforce in the world, thousands and thousands of solutions we have, was driven by our employees. And this is like 2014 and 15. And I remember the lady came to me and she said, "Why are you making me do this kind of work?" And I think that kind of went on to this thing that we will eliminate. Human beings will not do any work which is measurable, repeatable, predictable, or transactional in nature. And that became our theme, as we changed our stuff. So main influencers for me have been my people.
So I didn't realize you've been at Accenture for 27 years. So you must have joined around the time of the very first outsourcing deals with BP. I remember that with, because our very first HFS roundtable was in like a few years later, and Alan Ellis and Russ Taruscio were the guys there who I think they brokered that, but I don't think it was even called outsourcing at the time. So it's fascinating that you've seen that you've seen the whole journey.
I've seen the whole journey from beginning. You're right, Phil, right? We got our approval for our first center in 2001 for few seats. And I think that's kind of where the story started. You're absolutely right. I've seen it right. I've seen every single client of ours.
Excellent. So what have you learned over the last 18 months that you believe will carry through the rest of our careers? And do you think that we'll snap back quite soon, or do you think we've learned some things that are going to stay with us for always and drive us to do things differently?
I think whatever has happened in the last 18 months and what the behaviors, and I think we discussed about that yesterday, are there to stay. I don't think so there's going to be any going back from where we are, right? If I kind of just reflect back, what we have seen during the pandemic is the digital achievement gap widened. And those who had already invested in digital technologies had the tools and infrastructures in place where they were able to adjust faster, and they found new agile ways of operating. So I think the digital achievement gap widened during this. While most businesses were unprepared for the impact of COVID-19, I think those with a strong digital foundation helped them mitigate risk, and they also pivoted much more quickly to keep their businesses running at pace. So I think digital leaders who already invested in technology had the necessary collaboration and infrastructure in place, adjusted their supply chains faster, adapted to the new waves, of buying in the new crisis, right? And our research, I think, recent research which we did, even during the pandemic, there was a small group of companies, those with strong digital foundation in place, about 7% of the total. They still achieved about 3 times the profitability and 2 times the efficiency of the peers. Only 7% fail. And I think digital transformation was always a hot topic prior to 2020. However, the pandemic drove a sense of urgency, which we have never seen before, right? And I think that's kind of the one thing which the sense of urgency, super compressed transformation, timelines being crunched. I think we are seeing surging demand and urgency from clients to accelerate the transformation journey, and what I call as super compressed transformation, where transformation is being compressed into months rather than years, and it's like what we have never seen before. I think clients also are realizing that there is no way to go around digital transformation, and relentless focus on creating business value at speed. I think the appetite for transformation has really matured, I think over the last 12 to 18 months, and has become central to whether it is the CEO or the board agenda.
Right. So what are you finding, what techniques and methods are working to compress this transformation, to get this done faster, to make things that may have taken 8 months take it 2 weeks, right? I mean, what do you feel is working and what isn't from what you're seeing?
So I will say there are a couple of points, right, on this. One is, I think we are right now helping our clients build their digital foundation, right? Accelerate their journey to become what we call as future ready. And how are we managing this? We are managing through our Synops platform. And I think for us, I think platformization of services is becoming the thing. You just can't, do the same stuff without, a platform. And the way, again, we are defining shared services, the future, right, is about analytics, artificial intelligence, automation, right? That's kind of our AAA, driving the business outcomes, and very importantly, the experiences, whether it is of employee, whether it is of vendors, whether it is of the business users, right? Powered by Synops platform, which is in the cloud, right? And managed by super intelligent people. But I think that is the way we kind of look at the future, and that is what I will say are our enabling, engines, which is the Synops platform. Now, what does Synops do, right? Because I think it is just important. It combines, for us very importantly, the human ingenuity and with applied intelligence, right? Which is, the stuff around the analytics and automation and all the digital technologies to change the way the work gets done across technology, process, and people. And I think that, again, the outcomes being to create more agile, more resilient, and more intelligent operating models, to target what I call as the real business outcomes, right? I think we have invested hundreds of millions of dollars on Synops. And I think what it has created for us is a agile, flexible, remote enabled. I think it's important, which will drive the businesses. I think it has proved extremely resilient during the COVID crisis, and puts us in a position of strength to really help our clients deliver, successful outcomes. And I think if I were to kind of give you some examples, right, in terms of how we are managing this, I think let me take 3 or 4 examples which are kind of relevant in these times, right? How did Synops help client build a digital foundation and maintain the business continuity, right? First example I will talk about is demand planning. We applied an AI-enabled demand and supply planning services to really ensure that they can produce and products are available at local stores to meet accelerating demand, increasing shipment visibility, and local vendor consolidation, right, as stores begin the reopening more broadly. So that's one. Second one, which again, very, very passionate about, medical equipment. We helped a global medical device manufacturer simulate the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, right, on the company's product line and demand. The accurate advanced data analytics on inventory landing position we delivered gave the client the ability to assess the effect on the year-end cash flow, right? So with this kind of an innovative, tailored solution, the company boosted in this pandemic times by controlling quarterly production while having forward-looking visibility in place. That's kind of the second one. Third one is, again, important in these times around medical equipment sourcing. We helped operate a company's spare parts supply chain to maximize the availability of the medical equipment. And I think optimizing the resiliency of AI-enabled forecasting, right? I think procurement, shipping of new parts, reverse logistics for the defective parts. So that's kind of the third one I will kind of say, right? The fourth one is around inventory management. We really helped manage supply chain disruptions of critical items as well as volatile demands through the use of machine learning to really forecast better demand and supplier models. Again, optimizing inventory, thus leading to shortages of less than 1%, right? And that kind of are some of the examples where I think the platform really helped us. Our investments of hundreds of millions of dollars, across this really helped change the clients or help manage clients, their environment in a different way. Phil.
Yeah, I just think it's great to create this environment that is much more data driven, much more outcome driven. What are you finding are the biggest challenges to getting clients into the mindset to leverage a solution like Synops?
I think it is two things, right? One, I think, is sometimes the clients are still functioning in a very siloed functional way. Some of these processes that we are seeing, they are across different functions. There's a lot of synergy, right? If you look at end-to-end process, which is the much maligned word, you're not talking about within a function. You're talking about this across the enterprise. So I think that ability to think beyond the function across the enterprise, is one big, challenge. The second one is the change management challenge, across doing and executing this. But we have to really think about this in a way which is cutting across the enterprise and not siloed functional ways.
Well, you're talking one office now. It's so true that if you can have your people in accounting or procurement, HR, really get a stronger flavor for the impact they're having on the broader organization, how their processes and their data really links in, it really does drive much more of that, I'd say, ability to design process and think differently. Like if you talk to anyone from Google, I even know a guy there who runs like the accounts payable transactional work, but they're so excited about where they work because they know what they're contributing to the business and they know the business strategy and they know where they're going. And I think it's the more you can give people that broader perspective and understand the data that they need to do their jobs, it's fascinating. So how do you see this evolving over the next 6 to 12 months? I know India has been such a terrible situation recently, and it feels like it's getting a little better. Do you feel that when we talk in a 6-12 months time, this will be fully in motion, this will be fully in play, or do you think we'll still be trying to figure this hybrid model out?
Yeah, I think let me kind of talk through in terms of where we are, right? I think this is tough times. I think we have been resilient. Our people, I think the industry, have been pretty resilient in this, but it has taken a heavy toll. Heavy toll in the way things are being done, a heavy toll because there are a lot of folks who are personally impacted, either themselves or their family members, and it is tough. We cannot say that things are really getting, even if you look at some of the numbers that we have, they're still around the peak that we had in September in terms of the number of cases, right? But I think that things are improving. I believe that we have been extremely resilient. Our people have been heroic in terms of what they have delivered. I think I speak this for whether it's my company or for the industry. I think our folks have been heroic. I think they have delivered. We have not seen any crisis from a client perspective or any of the other stuff, right? We have been able to manage extremely well. I think our global network, the resiliency of the global network, our presence in more than 50 plus countries was again helped, as we have moved on this, right? Now, I personally believe, right, as you kind of go and you say 6 to 12 months, I think the clients which I'm dealing with and partnering with are even more receptive to partner and to embark on their transformation journey. So I think, Phil, if you were to kind of look at 6 to 12 months, I think we are entering into. I think we entered into the area of hyper growth. I think probably a year back, and I think I see this as continuing theme. Our operations business, it continues to exhibit strong double-digit growth, right? Our proven capabilities, whether it is around the innovative Synops platform, right, the value-led approach, which had helped us to get a huge market share, right? I think twice that of our nearest competitor, something which we are extremely proud about, right? I think we are seeing, from again, and what I was looking at the same question you asked about 6 to 12 months, increased client demand for impactful transformation ideas, and I think growing appetite for future-ready operations. I think experience being one of the key levers. Cost takeouts is table stakes, and we will, they want it at scale and speed, and I think we will get there. But I think experience is becoming a much bigger word. Whether it is for employee, whether it's for the businesses, whether it is for the different functions, right? Experience has become a huge thing, right? Ability to transition to adaptive service models, catering to the new work from home, this thing, and the gig economy. So I think those are some of the stuff which you will see in 6 to 12 months going more and more.
Right. I still believe, we talk a lot about these location agnostic models, but India is the one location where I think you see real coming together of people and innovation in centers. And even right up until this second wave of COVID, people were still going into the office and still chugging through this. And I still feel that India is going to lead a lot on people innovation, not just its ability to deliver expertise. I really think that this is a place where India will emerge very, very strongly, because no other nation is really building out the environment that India has, and I just think it's going to evolve in a whole new direction.
Completely. I think there is no two opinions on that, and I think we have seen this whether how we have executed the virtual work from home. But the big thing to fill what you just mentioned, virtual innovation. I always used to worry if you're 2 years back about, can we innovate in a virtual environment? Or can we only innovate when we have people together in one room? Because our mindset was typically that we have to be in one room and we have a whiteboard. But I think the way that technology has come, right, the way it has become, an enabler for some of the stuff, and you can see, the different tools that we have. I think virtual innovation is here to stay, and absolutely the powerhouse of India, the talent that we have, it's our largest location, in the world. There is no doubt that it will continue to lead, us towards more and more innovation, but probably in a virtual environment.
Exactly. Good. Well, thank you very much, Manish. I think everyone's heard a lot more about your story and your ideas and thoughts, and you've articulated Synops beautifully for everybody today. So thank you very much, and hopefully we can catch up in person in a few weeks' time. So
thank you, Ben. Take care.
Cheers.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are reaching towards the end of our 2-day, 1.5-day symposium. And one of the sessions that I am really looking forward to is this one, not just because I'm moderating it, but also because this is where we want to look at what's really happening with the current wave of innovation, right? Where are we going from an enterprise innovation perspective, and what is the role of and the power of technology behind it? Right? I think we've been hyping and talking about digital for the last 10 years, for the entire decade. But how many enterprises have truly digitally transformed? We can count them on our fingers, if any, right? And we still see a lot of enterprises continue to limp along, right, papering over their cracks, staying in the same game. And I wanted to talk today about, has the pandemic shock created a new paradigm where technology innovation is critical for survival, and can enterprises really make the change to change the habits, instead of resisting change, embrace change. And what we have done here at HFS is created this enterprise innovation framework, which is essentially across 3 horizons. I think where we are today is Horizon 1, digital. And I think digital transformation is really Horizon 1. You've got to do it today. As of now, it should be done. And I think that's the challenge that we're throwing out to enterprises, because I think digital transformation, the way that we've looked at these 3 horizons innovation frameworks is, from a scope of innovation as well as what's the value aspiration. Now, if you look at digital transformation, most of the scope is functional in nature. I want to transform my finance and accounting function, or my logistics function, or my procurement, or I want to improve my IT. And we're still thinking linear, right? We are still thinking in terms of efficiency, effectiveness. How do I get the right workflows that work across my organization, across end-to-end processes? I think Horizon 2 is what One Office is all about, right? That's what we've been talking about these entire 1.5 days, where we start to move beyond, a functional mindset to an enterprise mindset. That's when we start to talk about, is my enterprise digitally native? Am I cloud native as an organization? And the scope suddenly moves from, your function, your silo, to the entire enterprise. And that requires a different mindset altogether. That requires a growth mindset. That requires IT and business to collaborate. That requires data-led decision making. That requires IT to know business and business to know IT. And that also requires you need to start to delve into more exciting technology. And then the last, I think, is beyond One Office. That's Horizon 3, and we've started to see that happen as well. And we're calling that hyper-connected enterprises, where we start to see collaboration across multiple organizations with common objectives, driving completely new sources of value. Right? And that requires external collaboration. That requires data monetization. That requires completely autonomous processes. And that requires new technologies. Look at what's happening with distributed ledger. Look at what's happening with this whole stream of DeFi or decentralized finance. Just as an example, that was less than $1 billion in market cap about 15 months back, and today it's over $70 billion. In just 12 months. That's what's happened to DeFi. We can't just defy DeFi anymore. The 5G revolution is coming to play. Quantum is not just science fiction. There is stuff happening. So how do enterprises look at innovation, both from a scope perspective, from a value perspective, and also from a technology perspective? That's really what we wanted to talk about in today's conversation, and would love to have panels, my panel come on screen now, so that we can start to have this conversation. And gentlemen, let's start with quick introductions, maybe, where you can talk about what you do at your organizations, but also to make it interesting, if you can share one thing that really excites you about technology innovation and one thing that really frustrates you. I think that'll make it fun. So Jason, maybe we start with you.
All right, thanks, Rob. I'll take the first go at it then. So I'm Jason Kelly, and I am the general manager for the IBM strategic partnerships across all of our services business around the world, and have for a number of years led one of our largest ecosystems plays, which is our blockchain business globally. And I would say the exciting part about technology is the excitement we get to see when it works across not one, but multiple clients. And it's the aha moment of, we should have done this a long time ago. And this is so excitingly easy. And as I heard in the prior discussion with Accenture, it's the experience is totally different at that point. Now, just as the joy of that comes into play, it's the frustration of, why didn't you do it earlier? And it's the business processes and all the things that stand in the way of actually implementing that new capability because of the way it's always been done, because of all the silos that stand in the way of actually making it happen. So getting past that, the excitement is right there on the other side.
Thanks, Jason. KK, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, hi, Kalyan Kumar, call me KK, CTO for HCL Technologies, and also run all our ecosystems and all our ecosystem business units, which includes hyperscalers and tech OEMs across the globe, and also the industry partnerships. Technology, and you asked me what is interesting and what's frustrating. I think it's actually both. The rate of change is actually really impressive because speed at which technology adoption is changing, and especially with cloud and hyper platforms and things around that, your ability to do rate of change is quite good. And that's really important because it's the speed which really matters. But I think the frustrating part is also the rate of change, because people are not, I think the ability to pace and catch up. In your picture, you talked about Horizon 1 and 2 and 3. I think the 3 is needed now. The challenge we have is this very famous old quote, which I pick on, which is a God made world in 7 days because he had no installed base, correct? And I think the fact is that we all carry and drag this whole large complex installed base. But I think at some point in time, we all have to take hard decisions and tough decisions. And sometimes that's people change is slower than technology availability and technology change. I think adopting that quickly, and that's where skills transformation, people mindset change, culture change. It's not that I want to be cloud first, correct? You have to also think cloud native, correct? You have to bring the mindset, the culture. That's where I think it's like a dual pull happening on both sides.
Oh, that's a great point, KK. Mike.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. So Mike Morris, I am the CEO of Topcoder, a global crowdsourcing platform for software development, data science, and creative design. We are an owned entity by Wipro, and I'm very happy to be here. And so both of these questions, I'll start with the positive. I'm generally an optimist. So what am I excited about in terms of technology innovation? And I think really, to me, it's like this era that we are in with the ability to scale digitally. So I typically think of that because of my background as scaling with a platform, but it's really that, you know, if you can, as we talked about before in the prior session, if you can create an amazing intuitive experience digitally, that ability to scale it and our mindset shift, like we really can go as an organization, as an individual contributor, as a team, you can go from thinking from, hey, I can 2x what I'm doing, 10x, 100x, I can 1000x what I'm doing at no greater, you know, organizational cost. And I think that is what really excites me about, you know, where we are with technology innovation right now. And as digital makes it happen. So what frustrates me, the core of my frustration will typically come from processes and procedures that just suck the ever-living creativity out of a worker. So I think organizations, as they grow, they tend to create more processes and procedures that suck creativity out of people, that reduce flexibility of decision making or autonomy. I personally don't feel like it has to be correlated to the size of an organization. I feel like as organizations grow, they have to change in order to, keep creativity, as part of their culture. But that's probably the biggest thing that frustrates me, is just seeing where creativity is stifled and that inertia is created.
That's great, Mike. And then last but not the least, my partner in crime, Joel.
Thanks, Rob. Joel Martin. I am the VP of our cloud research here at HFS. So I won't go into my long assorted past, but I've been on the vendor side, the buyer side, and back on the analyst side. So I've kind of seen and I've been in different shoes, if you will. What excites me the most, honestly, is creation everywhere. Like, it isn't coming just from California these days. Innovation is coming from all over the place. And so that just makes the choice you have culturally, socially, individually about what you can do, it's out there. The biggest frustration, though, and honestly, I think this is why everybody's attending this event, is where do you place your bets? And especially these days, we find ourselves like we are right now, isolated in our four walls. It's what technology is going to move, my business objectives forward, which one's going to captivate and build on the culture of my organization so that it's sustainable. Jason, KK, Mike, you all talked about it. That inherent, we've been doing this for so long, and now there's new technologies out there. Which ones are the best ones for me to place my bets? That's my biggest frustration as a buyer, and then as an analyst, working with folks, is figuring out which ones are going to bring value.
Yeah. So Joel, I know those are all great points. And Joel, maybe I'll ask you the first question, right? Because you've been trying to analyze this